After I successfully saved the tragic, mute supporting character, he finally fell for me. We grew close, cherished each other, and promised a lifetime together. But during a sudden fire, I watched him, drenched in sweat, frantically scoop up his unforgettable first love and run for the exit. I was pinned not far away, swallowed by the searing flames. After burning to death, I became a ghost. I followed Luke around all day, unable to leave his side. I tried to get away from Luke countless times, but whenever I made a desperate break for it, I'd slam into an invisible barrier and get thrown back hard. After failing again and again, I gave up. I accepted my fate of being bound to Luke. Wherever he goes, I float. Late at night, the stars were bright and everything was quiet. Luke was in his study, buried in rewrites for a screenplay. The blue light from his computer screen cast his sharp brow in a cool, distant light, like a far-off mountain range. The fingers tapping the keyboard were long and elegant. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing a dark scar on his forearm. It was a burn from 3 days ago, when he rescued Julian. 3 days ago, at that same time, in that same mall, was the day I died. Fire and smoke raged. Just a few yards away, he didn't hear my cries. He threw a soaked shirt over Julian, picked her up, and sprinted outside. I had terrible luck. Just as the fire spread to my area, a falling guardrail post crushed my right foot. The sharp pain made it impossible to move. Julian was just a little ahead of me, knocked to the ground by the panicked crowd. My breathing was ragged as I called out in worry, "Julian!" My weak voice was cut off by the sight of a tall figure. A figure I had watched for nearly 10 years, familiar down to my bones. Luke was here. The moment I saw my love, my heart instantly settled. I stared with wide, surprised eyes. But he didn't see me first. He ran straight past me, rushing toward Julian. Beads of sweat covered Luke's forehead. Without a word, he lifted the unconscious Julian onto his back. "Hey, Luke!" Thick smoke poured into my nose and mouth from all directions. Enveloped in sheer terror, I covered my mouth, unable to make a sound. I could only frantically shake the pearl bell on my wrist. The pure copper clapper rang, its crisp sound chiming intermittently, mixed with the chaotic sounds of crying and screaming. "Luke! Luke!" Luke didn't stop. His body trembled, his nervous eyes fixed on Julian in his arms. That idiot Luke! How could he not hear me? I thought, stunned. The flames roared. Another piece of the building fell. I clutched the bell, my strength fading. The last thing I ever saw was the image of Luke's back, carrying Julian, as he disappeared into the distance. The fire spread, burning hotter and hotter. After what felt like an eternity, my blurry vision was consumed by smoke, and the world went completely dark. I tasted something salty and wet on my lips. Even in death, I was still clutching. The bell. That bell was a gift from Luke, from the day we made it official on the first snow of the year. His face was emotionless, but the tips of his ears were faintly red as he tied the pearl bell onto my wrist himself. Luke was mute. He couldn't speak, but he awkwardly signed to me. If I missed him, I just had to ring the bell. He'd hear it and come running no matter what. I had leaned on his shoulder then, grinning like an idiot. "Do all you screenwriters talk so sweet?" And after we fell in love and promised each other forever, anytime I wanted to see him, Luke would always rush to my side, no matter how far away he was. But 3 days ago was the first time Luke ever broke a promise to me after we got together. As I was dying, a cold, electronic voice sounded in my ear. "Host, do you regret it?" It was the system that had sent me to this world to win Luke over in the first place. After I succeeded, I had chosen to stay in this world and grow old with him. "Host, I can't save you in this world. After your body dies, your consciousness will remain until you detach and return to your original world. Also, I can grant you one wish, as long as it's within my power." Luke deleted the entire script he'd been working on all night. You could tell he was not in a good state. Luke was a famous screenwriter, one of the top in the industry. He was a perfectionist about his work. In the past, whenever Luke stayed up late grinding on a script, I would bring him a loving late-night snack, and then fall fast asleep in his study, just to keep him company. I was a terrible cook, but Luke always ate every last bite of whatever burnt mess I put on his plate. Occasionally, he'd have me sit on his lap, his arms wrapped gently around me from behind. Now, I watched his exhausted state with a cold heart, feeling nothing. Floating in front of him, my empty eyes reflected a deep hatred. I scoffed. Someone like you doesn't deserve love. You deserve to die alone. Of course, Luke couldn't hear a ghost. He rubbed his temples, picked up his phone, and opened his messaging app. The ID pinned to the top of his contact list was Zoe. Zoe is me. My name is Zoe Shaw. I hadn't replied to his messages in 3 days. Tired of floating all over the room, I decided to sit on his desk and see what he was up to. After staring for a while, Luke actually smiled. He reached out and touched my little dog Avatar, a faint curve forming on his lips. Luke poked Zoe's little face and said, "So cute. Luke, call me when you're not busy. Luke, can you just let me know you're safe?" After waiting a long time without a reply, Luke started to initiate a video call, but he hesitated and then canceled it. Before I left on my business trip, I told him it would be crazy busy with a difficult client. I'd be on call 24/7, might not reply right away, and that he should let me know before calling. A moment later, he couldn't resist poking my avatar again. Luke poked your coffin lid and said, "Get up and party." Floated near the ceiling, phone in hand, crying with mischievous laughter. Yes, the ability to control my phone was the final wish I had asked of the system. At first, I'd wished for my spirit to be able to leave Luke, but the system said it couldn't do that. For some reason, I wasn't curious about how Luke would react when he found out I was dead. Whatever he showed, regret or pity, would just feel disgusting to me. The man froze. The worried frown on his face suddenly relaxed, replaced by a helpless, soft laugh. "Luke, that's not funny." After thinking for a long time, Luke carefully searched through his sticker collection and sent one. "Luke, miss you." I floated in midair, poking at his shirt collar, laughing so hard I could barely stay upright. The laughter slowly faded, and my expression finally turned completely cold. "So sorry, but Zoe's already dead. How can a dead person call you back? Have you forgotten? I was only a few feet away, but you didn't have eyes for me. You said you loved me, but at the moment of life and death, you couldn't even see me. Luke, I don't forgive you, unless you die too." This was the 4th day I was forced to haunt Luke as a ghost. Luke's life was very simple. He'd send me a good morning text, write his script, eat, sleep, and send me a good night text. Lately, he'd been growing more and more anxious. He'd write pages of the script only to delete them, and the study floor was littered with crumpled drafts. Another night, Luke woke up with a start. I'd been sleeping soundly, but his movement woke me up. I grumbled and gave him a kick. Sadly, I kicked nothing but air. Damn it. I'm a ghost and he still won't let me get any rest. I gnawed on the inside of my cheek in frustration and rolled over to go back to sleep. I don't know if other ghosts need sleep, but Zoe Shaw, definitely do. King of naps, even in death. Luke sat up in bed. He must have had a nightmare. His breathing was shallow, his face was pale, and he was covered in a cold sweat. He couldn't speak, only gasped for air in silence. His dim eyes filled with a certain loneliness. "Luke, Zoe, I miss you." My phone received his message again. Luke wiped his face, picked up my photo from the nightstand, and stared at it for a long time before finally giving me a call. Beep, beep. After a few rings, the call ended. No one answered. He paced back and forth in the room, then sat down, his fingers lightly tapping on the desk. His profile was handsome and refined, but his eyes flashed with a hint of worried confusion. His pupils shimmered like a deep, clear lake rippled by a breeze. Those eyes were still as beautiful and captivating as the first time I saw him, completely unchanged. It took me 10 years to finally put my own reflection in those cool, indifferent eyes, to finally make Luke look at me with a bit of warmth and affection. I thought Luke loved me, but a crisis reveals the heart. A love built over time, it turned out, could never compete with the one he'd carried a torch for years. Luke, oh Luke, how could you have not noticed me when I was right in front of you? Was Julian the only love etched into your very bones? So that whenever he was around, you couldn't see anyone else? Zoe Shaw would never, ever be Luke's #1 priority. Strange. I didn't know ghosts could feel pain. This being my first time as a ghost, I didn't understand. I reached for my heart, the place that used to beat wildly just at the sight of Luke. Now it was empty, with nothing left but a pile of ashes. Luke texted me every day. Even though I was a ghost, thanks to the back door the system gave me, I could have replied. But I refused. Instead, I had a blast messing with him, changing the custom poke message and floating around the room, thoroughly enjoying myself. Luke poked your wooden fish.
Zoé karmique mérite plus un.
Luke patted my ex's tombstone and lit a stick of incense. Luke poked the red thread of fate between us and said, "Oops," it snapped. Luke lowered his head, staring at my ever-changing poke messages, pondering them for a long time. Finally, he carefully typed out a sentence. "Zoe, did I do something wrong?" I zipped in front of him, bared my teeth, and made a genuine, hideous ghost face. I tried to slap him across the face, but my hand just went through him, and I almost tumbled over myself. Good thing I'm a ghost. I can fly. Doesn't count. Let's try again. I did a few loop-de-loops around the room before stopping right in front of his face. "You scumbag. You don't get to call me Zoe." Luke's brow furrowed slightly. Even though it was the height of summer, a chill ran up his spine, and he couldn't help but shiver. Luke drank a glass of warm water, changed out of his loungewear, and for the first time in 4 days, I saw him leave the house. The mall was filled with a romantic atmosphere. Today was Valentine's Day. Too bad there was no Valentine's Day for me, only the 7th day of my mourning period. I floated behind Luke, watching as he followed a sales associate to pick up a diamond pendant that had been custom ordered. The precious, brilliant pink diamond almost blinded my ghostly eyes. Who was it for? Julian? I covered my eyes with my hands, trying to fool myself as my lip quivered in hurt. I latched onto Luke's back, took a big, angry bite out of his shoulder, and wrapped my arms around his neck, shaking him with all my might. "I hate you." Luke, completely unaware, just frowned slightly, assuming the mall's AC was a bit too cold. After carefully putting the pendant away, he went into a clothing store. Because communication was difficult for him, Luke didn't usually like to go out. Today was a rare exception. My empty eye socket stung, but no tears would come. Luke picked through the clothes with extreme care, typing on his phone while gesturing to the sales associate. It looked like he was describing Julian's style and preferences. I was busy clinging to Luke's back, furiously gnawing on him to vent my anger, and missed the words on his screen. Male, about 5'10", very slim, fair skin, loves to smile, has dimples when he does, likes the color pink. A gift for my partner. The sales associate's eyes widened in surprise. Then she smiled warmly. "You must love him very much." Luke's cool, jade-like eyes suddenly softened as if they were melting. "Thank you. He's a very sweet person." Luke didn't go home. He went straight to Central General Hospital, buying a gift and then delivering it to the person in question. That makes perfect sense, my ass. "Luke, do you even remember that I, Zoe Shaw, am your boyfriend? When I first became a ghost, I could fly around effortlessly, but today I could barely float." I curled up into a ball with my knees to my chest, shrinking into a corner outside the hospital room, covering my ears in misery. I remember when the system first sent me into this world. I was a straight-as-an-arrow, red-blooded guy, completely uninterested in the romantic drama between the male leads of this novel. The system had set me up as a background character, a rich young master with no connection to the main plot. In the real world, I was also from a wealthy family, so I wasn't attached to this life. My plan was to just get through the story and slip back to my comfortable real life. But fate had other plans. The moment I met Luke, I knew that love at first sight wasn't just a myth. I was 17 that year and Luke was 18. The young man had short, dark hair, and his eyes were clean and timeless. His profile was impossibly handsome. I just stared at Luke, with only one thought in my head. Zoe was going to make him mine. He was destined to be my future husband. We were destined to get down and dirty. After imagining 18 different embarrassing positions in my head, I started asking around and found out that Luke was mute. I heard he'd had a high fever as a child, but his family was poor and couldn't get him treated in time. It damaged his throat, and he lost his ability to speak. After some more digging, good news, Luke wasn't straight. Bad news. Luke already had a first love, a boyfriend named Julian. Good news. Julian was the main bottom of the novel, and Luke was just the unrequited supporting character. Bad news. Luke was hopelessly in love with Julian. Ugh, the main couple is destined to be together. What's a tragic side character like you doing getting involved? After carefully studying the world's plot provided by the system, I felt confident and decided to win Luke over. I, Zoe Shaw, am incredibly cute and worthy of love. I would definitely capture Luke's heart. I first got close to Julian and became his good friend. Through Julian, I naturally got to know Luke. By this time, Luke and Julian had already broken up. Julian's true love, the top, had already appeared in his life. Alex, the heir to the Han family fortune. The two were currently tangled in a you love me, I don't love you drama. And Luke, because he loved Julian so much, continued to watch over him even after they broke up. He was mute, humbled by his circumstances, and didn't dare to speak his love aloud, but he couldn't bear to leave either. Whenever Julian and the main love interest had a fight, Luke would just glance over and then look away, waiting quietly on the side. If Julian was sad and needed him, he would take Julian home, but he never crossed the line. The main love interest was an overbearing, burn-it-all-down CEO type, but before he truly matured, he was extremely childish and had once bullied and humiliated Luke out of jealousy. Luke was an orphan from a poor background. How could he possibly be a match for a blue blood like Alex? He silently endured all the injustice, his kindness to Julian genuine, without a single word of complaint from beginning to end. Sigh, what a pitiful, deeply devoted soul. My first formal meeting with Luke was at my birthday party. Alex brought Julian to the Shaw family's youngest son's 18th birthday celebration, where Luke was set up to be humiliated. Alex deliberately sent Julian away, then held up his wine glass with a smug, cold smile. Luke, look at you, you broke-ass loser. Did you sneak in here to climb the social ladder? Ah, you've ruined the young master's birthday party. Figured out how you're gonna clean this up? A crowd gathered around Luke, whispering and pointing. The young man was dressed simply, his figure thin. Unable to speak up for himself, his eyes held a cool detachment. I was all dressed up in a custom-made suit that made my skin look fair and delicate. I'd been admiring myself in the mirror for ages, thinking I'd totally mesmerized Luke. As I walked down the stairs and saw Luke's predicament, my hands clenched into fists. I was furious. Don't you dare bully my future husband. I straightened the bright pink bow tie at my chest, stood outside the crowd, and deliberately called out, "What are you guys playing at?" Men and women swarmed me with compliments, but I ignored them all. Pretending to see Luke for the first time, I walked up to him and tilted my head. "Who are you? What's your name?" Seeing my husband up close, I almost pounced on him and devoured him right there. "My husband is so handsome." My eyes sparkled as I smiled. "My name is Zoe Shaw." Luke was slightly taken aback, giving a cool nod. I grabbed his hand, full of enthusiasm. "I'm a friend of Julian's." "You're his friend too, right? That means we're friends now." Having won the favor of the young master of the Shaw family, envious glances were cast at Luke from all around. Alex's eyes, filled with a deeper meaning, swept over me. He downed his wine in one go and sneered, "He sure is lucky." Luke gently pulled his hand away. He remained calm, his gaze sweeping over me like water, leaving no trace. He was not moved by my advances. I wasn't discouraged in the slightest and continued to enthusiastically introduce myself. "You can call me Zoe." "Luke, I really like the look of you." "I like you." Luke's expression remained unruffled, his attitude distant. He took out his phone and typed a few words. "Hello, have you seen Julian? I'm here to take him home." He was worried about Julian, his mind completely preoccupied with him. I bit my lip and smiled even more brightly. The party ended. Alex crossed his arms and sneered, "You've got a crush on him?" Our families were of similar standing, and we moved in the same social circles, so of course we'd known each other since we were kids, though our relationship was just so-so. I said it straight out, "Luke is my future husband. You're not allowed to bully him anymore." Alex didn't expect me to be so direct. "Husband? Ah, naive little rich boy." I cupped my cheeks, fantasizing about Luke smiling gently at me. My eyes filled with obsession. I clenched my fists and declared, "Luke and I are going to sleep cuddled up in the same bed one day." Alex laughed at my naivety. For people like us, when we meet someone we like, it's just for fun. But, little Master Shaw, how does it feel to fall for someone who doesn't love you back? I couldn't be bothered to enlighten the fool. I'm not like you. In the first 18 years of Luke's life, Julian was the only one who had been kind to him. They had grown up supporting each other in an orphanage. I could understand the bond and friendship between them. I was envious, but I wouldn't say I was jealous. In any case, Zoe Shaw would definitely be in Luke's future. I was sure of it. I wanted the rest of his life. From then on, I revolved around Luke all day long. I learned sign language just for him, chirping like a little sparrow. Luke was an extremely introverted person. No problem. I was bold. In a relationship, someone always has to take the first step. New Year's Eve. Luke was alone in his rented room. I knocked on his door and, when he wasn't looking, slipped under his arm, muttering, I'm starving, hurry up and start a fire. Luke, I think you were born to be my husband. What do you think? Luke, I can't stand seeing you with anyone else. Luke, do you want to sleep with me? Luke probably never expected a rich kid like me to be so boisterous. The moment the clock struck midnight for the new year, I signed Happy New Year to him. A brilliant smile overflowed from the dimples on my cheeks and was reflected in Luke's eyes. And so, I pursued Luke for several years, until my family went bankrupt, and my penniless parents and I had to move out of New York City. At the airport, Luke pushed through the dense crowd, running until he was out of breath. The usually calm and composed young man was a mess, his eyes red. He gripped my hand tightly, so hard it hurt. Don't leave. I'll support you. I like you. Luke, like Zoe Shaw, proved that I had succeeded. I thought if it hadn't been for that accidental fire, Luke and I would have been together for a very, very long time until we were old and gray. When Luke came out of Julian's hospital room, I glared at him, my cheeks puffed out as I blew cold air at him furiously. Alex, looking surprisingly decent for once, said to Luke, thanks. A few years had passed and this guy had learned some manners. After a moment of hesitation, Alex was still worried. He asked hesitantly, You're not going to do Zoe wrong, are you? Luke was silent, his deep eyes reflecting a glint of cold light, his profile handsome and distant. No. Alex breathed a sigh of relief and raised an eyebrow. Where's your Zoe? How come he didn't come with you? Luke seemed about to answer when the phone in his pocket buzzed. He immediately opened the screen, and for a second, a look of slight shock and confusion flashed in his eyes. He made a gesture to Alex and left in a hurry. I was supposed to be curled up in a corner, cursing Luke, but I was forced to follow his steps, dragged along sideways while crying my eyes out. Wah. You bastard. Let go of me, Luke. Luke found the colleague I had gone on the business trip with. The colleague scratched his head. Oh, Zoe came back a while ago, on the same bus as me. Luke's brow furrowed tightly, his eyes like a turbulent lake, betraying the storm in his heart. The young man's pale lips were pressed into a thin line, his breathing inexplicably quickening. He took a deep breath. Excuse me, what day did Zoe get back to the city? His fingertips were actually trembling as he typed. 4 days ago. Hearing this, Luke's face changed dramatically. His pupils filled with shock and confusion, and he froze, his mouth slightly open. I stood in front of him with my hands on my hips and poked his chest. Hey, I'm right here. I waved my hand in front of his face, cupped my cheeks, and giggled. Looking for me? What are you going to do, Luke? Maybe you should just die, too. Then you'll be able to see me. Countless messages and calls flooded my phone. Realizing something was wrong, Luke finally started looking for me. He was mute. He couldn't speak, couldn't leave a voice message, and his calls wouldn't go through. All he could do was send me messages nonstop. Zoe, where are you? I stuck my tongue out. I'm right beside you. You're the one who's been blind. Zoe, please come home first, okay? I'll come pick you up. The word home hit a raw nerve. I froze for a second, then squatted down against a wall not far from Luke, hugging my knees. I picked at my fingers, sniffled, and mumbled softly, Luke, I can't go home anymore. Luke went to my company, my parents' house, to every colleague and friend even vaguely connected to me, and to every place he could think of, but he still couldn't find me. On a bustling city street, Luke stood amidst the crowd, his palm clutching his phone tightly. He looked lost, as if he didn't know where to go. The streetlights stretched his weary shadow long and thin, adding a sense of distant loneliness. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked utterly exhausted. After running around for a whole day, Luke, who hadn't slept in 24 hours, returned home and searched every corner, only to be disappointed again. The entire house felt empty, unnaturally quiet. Luke continued to contact me, gently poking my avatar. Luke poked Zoe and said, "The grass on your grandpa's grave is 8 feet tall." He stared at it for a moment, then suddenly started scrolling up, rereading every single custom poke message I changed. I clung to Luke's back, suddenly finding everything tasteless. I didn't even have the energy to scare him anymore. I could see it now. It wasn't that Luke had no feelings for me. It was just that the person he loved most wasn't me. I moved around to face Luke, staring at him without blinking. His brow was slightly furrowed, his lips pale and chapped, and his face couldn't hide his weariness, but he was still elegant and handsome. Memories flashed through my mind like a movie montage. The first year, Luke's indifference and distance toward me. The second year, Luke would unconsciously watch me, his gaze lingering on me for longer and longer periods. The third year, on a snowy winter day, I crossed mountains to find Luke, who was out sketching. He brought me into a snow cabin and warmed my freezing hands. The fourth year, Luke was out of breath, his face no longer as cool as before. He held my hand tightly, begging me not to leave, promising to take care of me for the rest of his life. The seventh year, he gently carried me to the bedroom, his ears bright red, yet he pretended to be calm, planting a series of loving kisses on my forehead. I closed my eyes and murmured calmly, "System, end it. How many days left until I can detach?" The electronic voice sounded, "3 days remaining." Ping. The screen lit up. "Zoe. Let's break up. I found someone new. I don't want you anymore." Suddenly, Luke's fingertips froze. His expression darkened, and the calm pools of his eyes instantly turned to ice. Luke called the police. I was so angry I was jumping up and down. "Hey," I said, "break up. Break up. You scumbag. Don't you understand? Why are you calling the cops?" After filling out the report, Luke handed my photo to the officer. He tried his best to stay calm, but I could feel how chaotic his breathing was. Calm on the surface, but on the verge of losing control. "You can still contact him, and he's sending you messages. Are you sure he's missing?" Luke's eyes were bloodshot. "Zoe wouldn't play this kind of prank on me. Something's happened to Zoe. He's not safe right now. Please save him." After giving his statement, Luke didn't waste any time. He got up to leave, looking like he was going to continue searching for me. Just as he was about to walk out of the police office, "Hey, wait a minute, sir." The young officer stared at my photo for a long time before his expression suddenly changed, and he shouted to stop Luke. The next moment, his voice was soft, extremely cautious. "Sir, could you take a look? Is this the person you're looking for?" Luke looked in the direction the officer was pointing. He stood there silently, his gaze fixed on the figure in the bottom left corner of the screen, his expression momentarily blank. Confused, I turned my head and saw a familiar figure in the bottom left corner of the screen. It was me, the raging fire, the panicked crowd fleeing in chaos, me, desperately shaking my bell and calling for help, and Luke, walking away with Julian in his arms, his eyes fixed forward. The video playing was from the mall arson case 4 days ago. A long time passed. Luke seemed to be in a daze. The color drained from his face, leaving it as white as paper. He opened his mouth. From a throat long and used, dry, hoarse, and garbled words were suddenly forced out, one by one. The voice was rough and unpleasant, like a saw scraping against a broken string. It felt as if the whole world was trembling and turning upside down along with it. Luke stopped eating and drinking, tirelessly searching for me in the ruins of the fire. I floated on his shoulder, making ghost faces, completely unmoved. "Stop looking. There's not even a body left." He maintained his usual calm demeanor, asking everyone he met, "Have you seen Zoe?" Using that rough, grating voice, he struggled to get the words out. The news of my death could no longer be contained. My friends from when I was alive all came to pay their respects. Alex even brought a discharged Julian to the cordoned-off ruins. I propped my chin on my hand and pouted. How lively. Everyone's here for my funeral. My parents were the most heartbroken, sobbing until they could barely breathe. Even Alex, who never got along with me, shed a tear. Only Luke didn't cry for me. The young man's features were serene. He just stood there quietly, his fingers hanging by his side, covered in scratches where dried blood mixed with fresh cuts. Julian's eyes were red. Luke, I'm sorry, please don't be like this. Luke turned his head to the side and asked softly, Have you seen Zoe? A sob escaped Julian's lips. Luke, when did you start speaking again? Luke didn't answer his question. He lowered his gaze and said to himself, I didn't see him. His mouth opened and closed, his voice low and muffled, as if his throat were full of gravel. Zoe is afraid of pain. I came to take Zoe home, but I can't find him. The 7th day after my death was Zoe Shaw's funeral. Luke didn't attend my funeral. Conveniently, I didn't want to hear the sorrowful cries of those who loved me, nor did I want to see the cold glares of those who hated me. So I curled up in my blankets, ready for a good long sleep. The system told me that when I woke up, I'd be back in the real world. My mind and body were finally starting to feel at peace when suddenly, Luke stood by the bed, yanked off the covers, and, without warning, pressed down on top of me. My eyes went wide, and I shot up like an angry cat, flying out of the way. Hey! Luke lay down on the side of the bed where I always slept. He took my spot, used my blanket, and shamelessly buried his head in my pillow, his fingertips repeatedly stroking the fabric. I was dumbfounded, puffed up like a blowfish with rage. You scumbag, are you gonna ruin my last peaceful sleep? 2. Luke lay on his side, completely silent. A faint redness slowly spread to his eyes, the light in them extinguished. His head was bowed low, his palm clutching something tightly. He clenched his jaw, his lips trembling as he tried to suppress it, calling my name over and over. I floated to the side of the bed, then looked away after a moment, finding it all utterly ridiculous. Luke, what is this? Repentance? Belated affection is cheaper than dirt. Besides, if it happened again, you'd make the same choice. Admit it. You don't love me at all. After muttering this conclusion to myself, I felt an unexpected wave of sadness. Well, at least I was about to be free. Zoe Shaw would be reborn, and in my new life there would be no more Luke. Luke slept restlessly. After a while, he got up and went to the kitchen to cook a plate of dumplings, the shepherd's purse dumplings I had made and put in the freezer before my business trip. I was forced to follow him to the kitchen, and for a moment I was stunned. Suddenly, I remembered a time I got mad at him. The night before, I kept saying it hurt, but not only did he not stop, he made it hurt even more. Back then, I thought Luke and I were completely in sync. After being cherished and loved by him for so long, I couldn't stand that kind of treatment. I immediately threw a fit, giving him the silent treatment and angrily feeding the freshly cooked dumplings to the stray dogs in our neighborhood. I'd rather feed the dogs than you. As it turned out, hey, the dogs wouldn't even eat them. They just sniffed them and trotted away, wagging their tails. I was furious, then just deflated. Luke brought the dumplings back inside and wrapped his arms around me with a warm smile. I'll eat them. Luke served 2 plates, even calmly setting out my bowl and chopsticks on the dining table. He slowly ate all the cooked dumplings one by one. Just like always, he smiled at the empty seat across from him and said, Zoe, they're delicious. My feelings were complicated. I bit my lip. You're insane. Luke washed the dishes, then stared at the phone on the table, his gaze fixed on our chat window for a long time. After a long silence, the young man suddenly let out a soft laugh, looking towards the spot in the air where I was. Zoe, you've been with me this whole time, right? I jumped, startled, and instinctively zipped behind the sofa, terrified that Luke was about to call some master exorcist to banish me before I could go home. Luke clasped his hands, his knuckles turning white as he squeezed them. A deep sorrow enveloped him. He looked up and smiled, his voice dry and hoarse. Zoe, don't be afraid. Couldn't trust Luke. I slowly backed away, trying to get as far from him as possible, urgently calling for the system. System. Can I leave now? Detecting that host has been deceased for 7 days. Initiating detachment sequence. The cold electronic voice began a countdown. 3, 2, 1. Beep. Luke sat with his head bowed, perfectly still. I took one last look at the young man and turned away without a shred of regret. In that instant, the cold, chilling aura around Luke abruptly vanished. He shot his head up, his eyes filled with a terrifying web of red veins. Zoe Shaw. He suddenly stood up and lunged forward, swiping at the empty air, desperately trying to grab something. Zoe. Luke's chest heaved, his throat raw. A surge of blood rose in his throat, and he coughed up a mouthful, staining the front of his shirt red. A moment later, the light in the young man's clear, dark eyes finally died. That evening, in a lone villa in the suburbs, flames lit up the sky. Inside the smoke-filled house, Luke clutched the pendant in his palm, as if holding Zoe Shaw in a tight embrace. Zoe, don't be afraid. I opened my eyes again to the smell of antiseptic. There was a man in the hospital room. He smiled and told me he was my boyfriend. I rubbed my head, which was a little sore. I had no memory of him at all. Following the man's advice, I rested in the hospital for a week. On the morning I was discharged, the knot on the bell tied to my wrist came loose. The crisp sound of it hitting the floor echoed from far away. I was about to bend down when another hand beat me to it. The young man's profile was handsome and strangely familiar, but I couldn't remember where I'd seen him before. He picked up my bell, and when he saw my face, he froze. A moment later, he handed the bell back to me, a gentle smile gracing his lips. Hello, is this yours? Epilogue. My love is Zoe Shaw. I love him very much. I love him most, and I only love him. Zoe never seemed to know that he was my true first love. I owed Julian my life. Back at the orphanage, he took a knife for me, a fatal blow. He almost died because of me. Luke, had no parents, a worthless life. Giving it back to Julian didn't seem so bad. I started being good to him. Slowly, being good to Julian became a habit. When Julian asked me to pretend to be his boyfriend, I agreed. For me, it didn't matter if I was in a relationship or who it was with, until I met Zoe Shaw. He thought our first meeting was at his birthday party. A pure, harmless little rabbit, with all his thoughts written on his face. Yet he thought he was hiding it so well, naively asking me, "What's your name?" Sunlight had burst into my barren, lonely life, bringing with it the vibrant scent of fresh grass. How could I dare to possess someone so wonderful? Zoe Shaw was the brilliant color in my black and white world. The first time I saw him, my dormant heart stirred. I fell for him. I liked him, but I was mute. I couldn't give him a better life. I wasn't worthy of him. Later, I started living a life that felt like a beautiful dream. I held him. I kissed him. I truly had Zoe. The day I rescued Julian, I thought, I finally paid back my debt. From now on, my life, my body, my soul, my everything belonged solely to Zoe Shaw. My Zoe. But after that day, I felt a persistent unease. I had nightmares for several nights in a row. In that terrible dream, my Zoe, my treasure, was dying, calling for help that never came, and was finally consumed by flames. I would wake up from the dream drenched in sweat. Turned out the dream was real. I had been cast into the deepest pit of hell. It's fine if I'm in hell, but my Zoe is afraid of pain. My treasure is afraid of pain. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? I let him feel pain. I can't find him. Just let me go to hell for good. My creator gave me one mission, to break up Zoe Shaw and Luke at any cost. He couldn't play God in the real world, but he could in a virtual one. And so, Zoe and Luke went through 10 lifetimes in the reincarnation system. No matter the lifetime, no matter how opposed or disparate their identities were, they always ended up falling in love. My master was furious. In the final lifetime, my master carefully designed an inseparable first love for Luke, but Zoe still fell for him at first sight. They overcame countless misunderstandings and finally got together. To make Zoe give up completely, my master decided to use a drastic measure. The day of the mall fire, my central control system received a cold command: sever all of Luke's sensory connections to Zoe Shaw. Luke simply could not see Zoe, and naturally, he could not hear Zoe's cries for help. This was the most brutal death Zoe had ever experienced. My master said he loved Zoe to the bone. I was puzzled. I am just a string of data. I don't understand love. But is this really what love is? Someone once seemed to say that love should be the fear of your beloved feeling pain. If my master loved Zoe, how could he bear to watch his beloved die so cruelly? The plan was a success. Zoe's love for Luke finally began to crumble after a tragic death caused by betrayal. I broke them up. Mission accomplished. The night the fire lit up the sky, I watched as Luke chose to burn himself alive. He was atoning for his sin against Zoe. For the first time, a few strings of meaningless, corrupted code appeared in my data stream. Back in the real world, I hovered in midair. Zoe was discharged from the hospital. My master was by his side. Luke appeared at another entrance to the hospital. The two of them on opposite sides were about to miss each other. My internal data stream began to fill with incomprehensible, jumbled code again, impossible to calculate scientifically. As if possessed, I used the last of my energy to act on the bell that had sealed Zoe and Luke's love. The knot loosens, and love begins anew. Zoe, my little master, I wish you happiness. I wish you no more pain.